Now, the countdown to COP28 Climate Summit has begun. The summit taking place in the United Arab Emirates this year. It's going to take place at or should we say on the 30th of this month. That summit comes as the world continues to face extreme weather conditions. South Africa has been spared from the devastating effects, spared or perhaps in other parts affected. You remember KZN, and that's one clear story of how South Africa has been affected by climate change. During last year's summit, one of the key outcomes of COP27 was to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. To find out how South Africa plans to reduce its carbon emissions, I'm joined now in studio by the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, Barbara Creecy. Minister, good morning to you, and thank you very much for making the time.
Good morning and greetings to all your viewers.
Thank you, Minister. Let's kick off the conversation with developing nations like South Africa, who would have gone to Sharm el-Sheikh. This was in it was last year, in November of last year, same period. And one of the aims was to secure funding. And what did we get out of that? $8.5 billion in pledges from Western countries. Where are we in terms of monetizing those pledges?
Well, I think one should say that these pledges are not pledges that are related to the climate process itself.
Right.
So these are pledges that developed countries have offered to South Africa to assist South Africa's climate transition. And last week, Cabinet approved what we call the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan. And this plan highlights 6 sectors of our plan, where we want to attract investment: electricity infrastructure, new energy vehicles, green hydrogen, skills is a very important area, municipal capacity, but also special support for the province of Mpumalanga that in due course will have to find other options for those currently involved in the coal value chain.
Yeah. Talking about developed nations, Minister, they called for urgent changes to the World Bank and other publicly financed or other publicly funded finance institutions. And the reason they were calling for these major changes is that they are saying the World Bank should be one of the institutions to fund poorer countries in order for these countries to meet their global climate targets. Do you know if this is likely to translate into real action?
Well, I think outside of the UNFCCC process, there has been a sustained call for reform of the global financial architecture. And I think that is something that has come about as a result of the huge sums of money that are required to finance climate resilience in developing countries. But it's also on the agenda because we know that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals have not been adequately achieved.
Yeah.
And currently developing countries are facing a situation where there isn't adequate finance for the Sustainable Development Goals. There also isn't adequate finance to build climate resilience. And what we know about developing countries, including our own, is that we are heavily indebted. So private finance does not flow to heavily indebted countries, and private investors are not interested in taking first loss in investing in new industries. And for these reasons, part of the solution to the climate finance crisis lies outside of the formal negotiations themselves with multilateral development banks, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and so on.
Before we move from this subject, Minister, am I correct to say that as things stand, there is no agreement yet on how to finance the impact of climate change?
Well, we have the famous $100 billion pledge, which has never been honoured, and which we are told every COP will be honoured in this COP. But I think that what we should be more interested in is the new financial dispensation that would come in post-2025. Right. And what we need to see is new, predictable, at-scale sources of public finance from developed countries for developing countries. This public finance is really important because even if there is availability of private finance, as I've already explained, this does not automatically flow to developing countries because of their indebted nature. And what we've seen is that the private financial flows are mainly within and between developed countries. So we are very interested in this new public finance goal. It's very important because there needs to be public finance for developing countries for both mitigation and adaptation. Yeah. And it's a requirement built into the Paris Agreement that the means of implementation must be provided by developed countries for developing countries.
Let's then talk, Minister, about the temperature goals. At COP27, some countries, the understanding is that they attempted to renege on this commitment to try and keep within the 1.5 degree Celsius commitment, or should we say a goal. Where are we as a country in terms of meeting those kinds of targets?
We submitted to the UNFCCC in 2021 our revised nationally determined contribution to reducing greenhouse gases. And that NDC has a range. At the top of the range, the reduction would be compatible with the 2% average global temperature increase. Right. And at the bottom of the range, it is compatible with the 1.5% global average temperature increase. What we said at the time when we lodged that with the UNFCCC is where we get to in our mitigation processes will depend on the availability of finance. And it was in response to that developed countries made the offer of the original offer of the $8.5 billion. Now, what we know, even though that offer has increased now to, I think it's somewhere in the region of $11.5 billion, what we know is that is only approximately a tenth of what it's actually going to cost for the transition to take place between now and 2030. Yeah. So while we through this implementation plan, we want to work on a clear pipeline of projects, we remain concerned that the finances that are currently available will not enable us to reach the 1.5 degree temperature goal, which we would like to reach if we had adequate financing.
Talking about the greenhouse gas emissions, in September of this year, Eskom officials telling Reuters news agency that 4 out of the 15 coal-fired power stations at Eskom are breaching government emissions regulations. Is that a worry for you?
Yes. I mean, this is related to emissions of what we call sulfates and nitrates, which it's widely known that those emissions impact on human health. And currently serving before me are various appeals from Eskom. So I wouldn't want to get into the details of this, but we were ordered by the Gauteng High Court that we do need to take adequate measures to prevent impacts on human health. And in fact, that court judgment found that the exceedances of emissions, and it's not just Eskom, I mean, there are many other industries as well, in what is known as the priority high-felt area, is a breach of residents' constitutional rights to a clean environment.
I know that you're desperate for us to move from this because this is an energy-related matter or an energy sector-related matter. But if the violations do continue, Minister Creecy, what could the potential consequences be for South Africa?
Well, I think that what we have to do is we have to look at the best case scenario for human health on the one hand and for economic stability and energy stability on the other hand. I think that we all know that we are still experiencing an energy crisis in our country, and we know that both the impacts of exceedances of the minimum air standards, those things impact on human health and well-being, but load shedding also impacts on human health and well-being. And you would know that at the time when I gave permission for Kusile to operate for a limited period of time without the flue gas desulfurization plant, I had to weigh up those very difficult alternatives. I think that it is possible to find a balance, but it requires all of us to work together and to put our heads together as to how we would achieve that.
I'm going to conclude the conversation, Minister, with the subject that we are on, because it is a fine balance for us in the country. As you mentioned, we are in an energy crisis. We're still heavily reliant on these coal-fired power stations. In fact, 87% of our electricity is generated in the main through these plants. Your considered view on how or whether or not we are on track to close more than half of this coal fleet. There's about 15 of these power plants that are coal-fired. Do you think that we're on track to meet that target in 10 years' time, by the way?
Well, the President, I think, in his newsletter in April, gave us a perspective on how we must approach this matter. So obviously right now, we can't be decommissioning coal-fired units right now. That doesn't mean that by 2030 the situation may not have changed and we may have greater energy stability. What we know from our environmental impact assessments is that there've been projects equal to 58,000 megawatts of electricity that have come to us for environmental approval. Now, I'm not saying that all of those projects are going to be on the grid tomorrow morning. But it's important to understand that there is a very big pipeline of projects, and those projects include both solar and wind, but they also include gas and other energy sources, battery storage, and so on. And we know that one of the inhibiting factors at the moment is the requirement to invest in further transmission infrastructure. We already have renewable energy resources that are up and running, which we have not been able to put onto the grid. So what I'm saying is that I think it's too early to conclude exactly how we should approach this matter. But there is light in the sense that there is a significant basket of projects in the pipeline, and I think that part of what the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan is looking at is how can we contribute towards investing in transmission infrastructure so that we can solve some of the blockages that we face at the moment.
Minister Creecy, I want to conclude the conversation in picture while we're talking. The President is down in KZN and monitoring the ports of our country. And that as well is something that should worry you in terms of the environmental impact of transporting coal via the road versus the rail system, and we know that it is struggling at the moment. What worries you most about our freight and rail infrastructure?
Well, I think that Minister Gordon and Minister Chikunga are working hard to look at how we solve this problem. Obviously, from an environmental perspective, it is much better to be able to shift that freight onto the rail system. And, of course, where there are requirements from our department, we're always willing to help.
Parting shot, what is it that South Africa takes to COP28 as very real commitments that you want to get out of that summit this time around?
Well, we've spoken about the new financial goal. I think that together with other African countries, we are keenly aware that it's very important that we need a clear global goal on adaptation and a clear work program and financing to achieve that goal. And of course, the global stocktake is the key deliverable from this COP. It's something that at a political level I chair together with my Danish counterpart. And we're looking forward to those negotiations so that we can have an outcome from the global stocktake that understands why we haven't been able to achieve all of our objectives globally since the signing of the Paris Agreement, but also make appropriate suggestions for how countries should be approaching their indices going forward.
Yeah. Minister Creecy, let me thank you very much for your time and best of luck to that summit. Can I also get a commitment from you that you're going to visit us back here, because there's lots to talk about in the energy space. It's a very contested space at the moment. And I also would like to talk to you about the mining space, you know, from an environmental point of view. These are matters that are highly, highly contested in the country at the moment. Could I get you back here sometime soon? Well,
we can talk about the topics, but the commitment to come back to Newzroom Afrika is always there.
Minister Barbara Creecy, thank you very much for your time. Okay, while I